Hi, Kristi. How are you?
I'm doing well, Douglas. How about yourself?
Good. I see a cat. You have a cat?
You do see a cat.
Oh, what kind of cat?
He's a ragdoll. He's actually he's nice and quiet at the moment,
Looks
which is
Himalayan from what.
nice, but he does. He's got the same kind of pattern. So he's got like the seal point markings. And I actually have a Himalayan too. So I've got two of them in the background. I don't think he's going to be moving too much. Um, but every now and again when I'm doing a call, there'll be like this you'll start, it's almost as if they know something's happening, and you'll hear one of these giant meows in the background. I'm hoping that doesn't happen this time.
Well, they're pretty smart creatures, but they're also very opinionated creatures too. And
Oh yes.
yeah.
This one's particularly bad. At some point, I think it was while I was going to work really regularly when I worked in a lab, and he got it into his head that I was supposed to be up, 5 or 6 a.m. every morning. And so he sticks his nose under the door, and then he'll let out one of these incredibly loud meows. Um, and to this day, he does it, even though we're now, everyone's pretty well at home, and we're in a pandemic. So he's my own personal alarm clock.
So you are an author, and you've got a book series out called Kincaid Strange. How many books in this series?
I do. The third book came out about a year ago now, and it's called Voodoo Shanghai.
Okay, why don't you give us a overview of the series?
So Kincaid Strange is it's urban fantasy, which is urban fantasy with a bit of science thrown in, and it's about a voodoo practitioner who lives in Seattle with the ghost of a grunge rocker. And she ends up, throughout the series, she gets pulled into murders with an occult nature. Um, and often is put into a situation where she has to solve the murder before she either gets blamed for it, um, and there's a cat in the background,
That's all right.
or before she uh, either before she gets blamed for it or before whoever's committing the murders comes after her. And the third book takes Kincaid down to Oregon, to Portland, where there are murders happening in the underground city where the zombies live. And there's also some ghosts who are going missing, and nobody else but Kincaid is looking for them.
Okay. What made you delve into this particular genre?
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd one since I started out in the sciences. I did a PhD in cell biology and genetics. So I, I there's something about urban fantasy. There's the escapism, which, as a scientist, I really love. Um, but there's a creativity. There's the world building, which is a lot of fun. Because especially with urban fantasy, with a fantasy novel, you can kind of make a lot of things up. You can make up your own world. But when you're doing urban fantasy, the idea is it's fantasy, but in a world we recognize. So you've got to make the fantastical elements kind of meld in with, you know, to make it look like it could possibly happen. It could possibly be happening. You've got to deal with microwaves and magic, sort of in it's sort of microwaves and magic, in the same uh, in the same book. And I, there's also this ability um, to deal with tough topics that are sensitive or are in the news, but because you're removing yourself a couple of steps, it's you have a lot more permissions to play with things that otherwise might get you in a bit of trouble. So that's kind of what drew me to it. There's also the mystery aspect. The books. The urban fantasy genre really lends itself to a good noir mystery, and I've always kind of been drawn towards those.
Well, give me an example of how you would weave in a social issue into something like that.
So, for example, you see a lot of urban fantasy will deal with magical creatures. Another very famous urban fantasy author, Patricia Briggs, and even Jim Butcher to a degree, will they'll have magical characters, but often they face a lot of social persecution and prejudice from people around them, and yet they're witches or vampires or zombies or people who play with magic or talk to the dead, and so you can talk about a lot of those topics, but there's that step of removal. Another one that I deal with in Kincaid, and kind of happened accidentally, is the concept of addiction. That's a very sensitive topic that's out there, but it's very prevalent, and it's an important one to talk about. Um, it's a lot easier to talk about something like addiction in a novel, and you can ask questions that are you can put scenarios and questions in place, such as, well, if you had, so in Kincaid Strange, she talks to the dead and channels magic through something called the other side. So sort of the power of the other side of the veil. And one of the things that she finds out as she's through the novels is that it actually has a very addictive nature to it. And so, as she's, so as she's going through the series, she has to deal with the question of, it's addictive component, but she has to use it to do her job. It's not pay rent or use other side, and it's an interesting question to explore. Those are a few examples, but there are so many more. Social striation is another one you see a lot discussed in urban fantasy. Magicians who have power and the rest of the people who don't. So I think there's a lot of examples of that.
Are you self-published or traditionally published?
I'm traditionally published. So my first series got picked up by Simon and Schuster, and that was my Owl series. And then my second series, Kincaid Strange, is got picked up by Random House, and Audible publishes the audiobooks as well.
Those are big publishing houses. You made it sound so easy. How did you get picked up by them?
I sort of ended up with a bit of, there's a saying I've always really liked, which is the harder you work, the luckier you get. Sort of cross your fingers and hope. So while I was doing my PhD, I was dividing my time between writing books and also writing my books and doing my PhD thesis. And so by the time I was ready to defend, I also had a novel to shop around. And not really knowing anything, all my background is, it's a science world. So what do you do when you've got a paper? Well, you submit it to journals. So, for the writing world, it seemed that you submitted your manuscripts to an agent. So I thought, all right, well, I'm going to send this out to agents of authors I really enjoy. And, I'll maybe do 100 of these cover letters, and, and then after that, I'll self-publish the book. But within, I guess I sent out maybe 10 of these query letters. And I heard back pretty quickly from my current agent, Carolyn Ford in Toronto. And I had reached out to her because I loved one of her authors, Ian Hamilton, who does a mystery series. So we hit it off, and she had my first series, Owl in the Japanese Circus, sold to Simon and Schuster in about a month. So that was a huge stroke of luck. And then my second series, we were lucky enough to get that sold to Random House a little while later.
What is the benefit to you to be traditionally published versus self-published? You don't have to do all the work yourself. You can kind of just sit back and let them handle the publicity and.
Not, it's a great question. Not really. Like, I mean, every author has to do some publicity, some marketing. Um, I like, because I'm from an academic background, I really like working with editors. I was really lucky with both Simon and Schuster and with Random House. I got to work with some world-class editors, and so for me it was kind of an intensive on where personally as an author, where I could work and where I needed to work on and what I was good at. So I found that invaluable. It is nice not having to figure out your own cover and do the editing. So there isn't that financial input that has to go into it. And it is nice having a contract where you know when you're going to get paid and what your deadline marks are. But there's a lot of self-published authors out there who would come back and say that there are advantages that they get during, through the self-published route that a traditionally published author doesn't get. So I think there's benefits and drawbacks. One of the things I do like about being with a traditional, another aspect is, as you said, not having to manage a lot of the business side of it, not having to worry about, is my book being pirated? Is my book, has somebody put a copyright? Has somebody tried to do a copyright claim on my book? Because that's something that's been happening more and more. I hear about. So yeah, I think that, I think there's sort of another side to it too, which is, anybody in the arts community, one of the big questions that everybody always has is, how do you get paid to do your particular art? So the nice thing about being with a publisher is you get a figure of how much that book is, how much your minimum is you're going to get when that book comes out and when the subsequent books come out. But like everybody else, like self-published authors, you still have to be very creative about how you're going to get paid, how you can convince somebody to pay you to write. One of the other things that I do is I do background in film and TV. So because there's a lot of downtime, it's actually one of the jobs where it's a huge benefit that I have my laptop and I'm working on a manuscript in the background.
So as an extra?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, super. Okay. Oh, well, we do need to kind of wrap this up. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yeah, it's KristiCharish.com.
Okay, and there's links to your book, and you're on social media, I assume?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, people can find me.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing, and best of luck with your book series. Hope it does well. Sounds like it's doing